Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I am Joe Devine, and I'm joined now by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hi, Joe.
Hello, how's it going?
Going well. It's going well. We just had a good chat with Paddy.
Yeah, we did have a good chat with Paddy Boyland. All about Everton Football Club. What's going on at Everton? Well, in the first half, we talked about the commercial activity at Everton. My favourite bit about that is the Angry Birds conversation. So I think hold on and listen to that. We also talk about the Sports Pacer deal, how Everton are searching for a new shirt sponsor, and there'll be a new manufacturer, and it's all happening, at the moment. So there's a lot to talk about there. And then Seb drills down on the stadium plans, Bramley-Moore dock. So we talk a little bit about that. Half time, we have a 10-minute tactics bit with Alex Stewart, who comes in and tells us what he thinks of Everton, some specific areas of interest. And in the second half, we follow that back up with Paddy talking about Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Jean-Philippe Gbamin, and also a little bit of Andre Gomes and a little bit of Gylfi Sigurdsson.
I thought the Sigurdsson chat was really interesting. Like the Calvert-Lewin bit is, for anyone, we did mention this during the pod, but after you finish listening, do check out some of Paddy's work on Calvert-Lewin, because he's an interesting player, and there's all kinds of things that that people won't have known about his career. But no, it's a really strong segment, and I learned a lot. The Angry Birds bit is good, actually.
Guess where you can go and check out Paddy's work, Seb?
Is it on The Athletic?
It's on The Athletic, it is. There's an offer.
John, how much would that cost me a day if I wanted to subscribe?
Do you know what? I actually don't know right now, because I think we're between offers, so I can't tell you. There is an offer, I think, right, it's either... I think the 90-day free offer is over. 90-day free trial is over. But there'll definitely be a free trial, whatever the offer is. But basically,
this is a compelling argument you're making here.
It might be 50% off again. I can't remember. But honestly, I don't know. But if you go to theathletic.com/Tifo, the offer will present itself to you, and whatever it is, it will be good, okay? And whichever version of it is, it will include a free trial. So even if you just want to cancel that before the week or the 90 days is over or whatever, be my guest. But do please go and read Paddy's work and Greg O'Keefe's work as well, who writes about Everton alongside Paddy, because a lot of the stuff they do, they're clued into the club, and it's so interesting. They have such an interesting perspective on it. I think both, in Paddy's case, both as a fan, but also as a journalist, and reading their things not as an Everton fan, I found particularly interesting. So I would encourage everyone to go and do that.
Can I give a little nod to their podcast as well? Because when we were preparing for this, I listened to 5 or 6 episodes of Glad Tidings, and it was really great. I'm not an Everton fan, of course, but the range of conversations is good. There's a really good bit on Luke Garbutt and whatever happened to his career that you should look out for as well. Yeah.
Hey, well, there we go. Anyway, that's all from us for now, and we will leave you in the very capable hands of, I was about to say Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Not doing that. Paddy Boyland. Paddy, can you update us on the commercial situation at Everton? I mean, with specific reference to the Sport Pacer shirt sponsorship, which we know is coming to an end, and we also know that Everton is searching for a new blue chip sponsor. How's that search going? And presumably the pandemic has had a bit of an effect on that. Is that fair to say?
I think the pandemic will have quite a substantial impact on future commercial deals, where Everton were at a slight disadvantage, if we can even call it that, is that they'd started doing the majority of the groundwork before COVID-19 hit. So they were making progress on the blue chip sponsor, as they like to call it. They have done substantial groundwork on the stadium front, the new stadium that will be down on the banks of the River Mersey at Bramley-Moore dock. So I think Everton are actually in a better position than most to ride this particular wave out. Our understanding is that they are making progress and should be able to announce something in the relatively near future regarding a sponsor. And then we have the other matter of the kit manufacturing deal, which they're currently with Umbro. Last summer they signed what was described as a multi-year deal, suggesting not 1 year but 2, 3, 4, but unspecified basically. That will also end according to our information. So they will end up with a new kit manufacturer. They will have a new shirt sponsor. And basically what they've done predominantly is as a kind of part of a strategic review over the last few years. They've looked at the performance commercially. They've looked at the financial performance across the board. And obviously Everton made a loss of 112 million as it was for the last financial year. That puts them right up against it in terms of FFP and other kind of UEFA regulations. UEFA regulations actually are even more stringent. It's meant to be 75 million, I think, over 3 years. And they've decided off the back of that they're going to be tougher with potential partners, i.e. if you can't follow our trajectory or you don't show our ambition, then you need to you need to go elsewhere.
Economically, do you mean?
Yeah, shut up kind of philosophy with regards to the economics, and some partners will continue, but I think the vast majority will move on. As I say, that will result in a new shirt sponsor. It will result in a new kit manufacturer. They will also the partnership with Angry Birds, Rovio, the umbrella company from Finland, is also under review, although both parties have been happy up to now with how that deal's gone in a variety of different ways. So it does feel as though maybe, even though this is not an ideal time to be looking at new partners, the fact that Everton have been doing this certainly since January and before gives them an advantage, and they have made substantial progress, if you will, in the search for those new partners moving forward.
Paddy, can I just ask, what's the sort of, I know you can only really speculate on this, but what's the ideal partner in this situation, both as a kit manufacturer, headliner? Is it a question of trying to associate the club with a different type of brand as well as one that's sort of economically viable? Is it a sort of almost a kind of advancement by association type of situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a symbiotic process, and I think sometimes, looking back on past deals, Everton had Nike, 2013-14, and the year afterwards as well, under Roberto Martinez, that was. And the main complaint from supporters, at least, was that the kits were pretty generic. They were Nike were effectively delivering the same template as was being found elsewhere. I think that's really important for Everton fans, that they have something that's kind of unique and a bit different, and that the partners of the club buy in to Everton as an institution and Everton as a brand. And maybe that's a bit inward looking, and maybe actually we should be looking at the pound signs at the end of the check, but and the amount of zeros there. But Everton have never really worked that way, and so certainly not until recently. And this, I think, has prompted the strategic review, as it's now being known. In regards to a blue chip sponsor, Everton need commercial deals that push them as close as possible to the top 6 clubs. I mean, there's not really a question of money in raw terms. Fahad Moshiri is a wealthy man. He is connected to wealthy people that can funnel resources into Everton Football Club. And if there was no such thing as financial fair play, Everton would effectively be able to continue unchecked and continue to spend vast amounts of money in the transfer market. It's the fact that you have financial fair play and the current accounting situation, which means that Everton almost have to, they have to abide by those rules. They have to look at kind of innovative ways in some cases to maximise revenue, to push themselves towards the top 6, and obviously that gap is only increasing. So maybe it's a bit of a cop-out, but to me it's a two-way street. You need a partner that respects the club, but you also need a partner, more than anything really at this moment in time for Everton, that can push them on and provide them with the cash to overcome some of those question marks that still linger in the background to some extent.
Paddy, can I ask how FFP is considered by Everton fans then? Because I'm always curious how fans of different clubs feel about it, and presumably it's normally based on their own club's situation. But I imagine that some Everton fans must feel that's a little bit unfair, given what other rival teams in areas not too far away have done over the past 10 years before the regulations came into play. Is it a topic of conversation in the stands, or is it just sort of accepted?
Yeah, I think it is a topic of discussion, and certainly fans look at Manchester City, about 40 miles up the East Lancs Road, and even Chelsea, going slightly further back. Look at what they've done and how they were able to progress basically unchecked with their spending, and almost wonder what might have been had Farhad Moshiri appeared on the stage 10 years earlier. I mean, Farhad Moshiri arrived at Goodison and he spoke, this was 2016, he spoke of there being a really short window in which Everton could attempt to bridge the gap between themselves and the traditional Big Six, if you want to call them that. You would now suggest 4 years on that that's going to be harder than ever, given the commercial might of those clubs and kind of how Liverpool have expanded in terms of stadium and even stature in some cases. Manchester United, Manchester City, these are big global organisations, and Everton at times have been quite, some fans won't like it, but parochial and small in terms of mindset, and a lot has been centred on the local kind of Liverpool 4, North Liverpool community. So Everton are attempting to make those strides, and I think they are moving closer to being what I would class as a 21st century club in that regard, and almost a sustainable 21st century club. But it will take time. It will take time, and certainly Evertonians, it's almost a what-if moment. What if Farhad Moshiri had arrived 10 years earlier? Would we now be in a position that, say, a Chelsea or Manchester City are in? We don't know, because Everton have made lots of bad decisions over 4 years. Lots of good decisions too. But it is a topic of conversation, certainly. I just feel almost that while that's brought up, we have to just live with the current situation. And the current situation is that those rules exist. Everton know as a club they need to adhere to them. There's no chance of Everton looking at this and saying, well, a few other clubs have flouted the rules, so we're going to try and flout the rules too. Every indication we've had that Everton believe that A, they can strengthen the squad, and B, they can do that by adhering to financial fair play. I just have to be honest and say I'm not entirely sure how you square that circle.
Paddy, one of the people who's going to be heavily involved in this process is presumably going to be Denise Barrett-Baxendale, the chief executive. She doesn't really have an awful lot of profile in the way that, and this is probably a good thing, in the way that someone like Karen Brady does in football. Can you tell us a little bit more about her and her background and her skill set? Yeah,
so she actually rose to prominence at Everton as the head of the club's charity, official charity, Everton in the Community. Did lots of pioneering work there, and Everton do see themselves as a community club, as I've mentioned. Barrett-Baxendale was at the centre of that. She pushed it forward to an extent, both in the community and at Everton as well, raising the profile of the charity within the squad to such an extent that the squad now sign up to a pledge that they're going to give back an X amount of hours to the local community every season, every year. So she rose to prominence through that. She's very well connected with what I would class as old Everton, so people like Bill Kenwright, people like John Woods, who was on the board, those kind of guys. She's highly thought of within the club by old and new Everton. And I think she's become a bridging point between those two regimes. You've still got Bill Kenwright there, the former owner, as the chairman, but then you also have Farhad Moshiri and people that he's brought on board. Say, for example, like Sasha Ryazantsev, the Russian who plays a role on the board and is heavily involved in the financial and commercial side of things. So Barrett-Baxendale rose from her position at Everton in the Community. There was a vacancy when Robert Elstone, who was the last CEO, left to join Rugby League and in a similar role at Rugby League. And Barrett-Baxendale was the in-house candidate who had, I think, what the Everton board and the powers that be considered to be the outstanding credentials. And I think the best way to summarise her impact so far is that, first of all, she's conducted this strategic review, Everton will push forward in terms of their commercial deals and their commercial output. They continue to do that year on year, and will need to do so for a good while yet if they're going to overcome some of the hurdles in front of them. But also, we were given a fantastic example when we did a little bit of digging. We looked at Barrett Baxendale's role as Everton CEO in relation to COVID and the crisis, the pandemic that's obviously engulfed much of the Western world and beyond. And I think it was late January, early February when people at Everton were having discussions over what they were seeing in China and how prepared Everton would be if this did, as expected, come over to the UK. And this was long before really even kind of local authorities and even the British government, dare I say it, were having those serious questions. Staff had software instilled on their laptops, so they'd be ready to work from home if needs be. Barrett Baxendale ordered a review of where Everton sat financially and whether they'd be able to kind of adequately survive a global recession kind of brought about by COVID. So I think she's quite forward thinking. I think she's impressed most of the people she's come into contact with. Maybe wasn't, as Seb's pointed out, maybe wasn't a name that was widely known outside of Everton circles and charity circles before she got the big gig at Goodison. But it's certainly making an impact behind the scenes and driving the club forward in my estimation, at least.
It's interesting that you mentioned the idea of her being forward thinking there. I mean, that example certainly sounds like it. And something that Seb and I were talking about before the podcast was the Angry Birds relationship, which you've already referenced once. It's something that, to be very honest with you, we thought when we first saw it was a bit cheap. But we listened to you guys talking about it on a recent Glad Tidings podcast, and you and Greg O'Keefe sounded very positive about it and talked about its innovation a little bit. I wonder if you just talk a little bit more about that whole relationship there and how it started and how it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, Angry Birds took over. They became Everton's first sleeve sponsor, so they sponsored the sleeve, and the main idea was from Angry Birds' side to position themselves for more of an assault on the markets that the Premier League are attached to, appeal to younger footballing fans, have those kind of promotions that cross over from purely Angry Bird fanatics into Everton fans, Premier League fans and elsewhere, effectively raising the profile. I'm led to believe they had they got the game out, but I'm led to believe they also were positioning themselves ahead of the launch of an Angry Birds film. I've not seen that, but I'm assured it's out somewhere.
A lot of big American comedy names, I think.
Well, yeah, who knows? who knows, quite frankly. But I know that has been deemed to be a success on the Angry Birds side. They've been pretty happy with the partnership. And it's allowed Everton, while Angry Birds have tapped into Everton's market, Everton have done the same with Angry Birds fans that go onto the game and they see some Everton players as Angry Birds characters. So Cenk Tosun, Theo Walcott were two off the top of my head about a year ago that were turned into characters. Recently it was Jordan Pickford, Andre Gomes, and that does of course prompt hilarity from supporters of other clubs. It's prompted hilarity from part of the Everton fan base, let me tell you, and yes, maybe some people do believe that it looks a little bit cheap on the sleeve. It's not what your traditional football fan might expect. But the reason I think we've both been so positive is, first of all, because we've heard positive noises from both clubs, and we've also seen the way Everton have pushed things on in terms of innovation and the way they've done that with a partner that does get them into different constituencies, get them out there with different demographics. Like I say, if Everton only appeal to their Liverpool, Northwest, hinterland and their base, then they're not going to grow as a club. And I think there has to be an acceptance that leaving Goodison allows them to do that, but also things like Angry Birds allow them to reach people that would never ever really have come into contact with Everton. And even if they did, they might have looked at Everton and said, well, why would I be at all interested in them when there's Liverpool, when there's Manchester United, Manchester City, all these clubs within an hour radius of the city of Liverpool are doing much better things on the pitch. So I think it has been considered a success. It's still up for review. If they don't want to put up more money, then maybe the deal doesn't happen again. It's not renewed. But that's what Everton are asking of every partner at this moment in time, really.
I tell you what, here's some Angry Birds film facts. I've just been looking it up, Paddy, as you were talking. It's actually, you know what? It's a very impressive cast. You've got Jason Sudeikis, Josh Gad, Danny McBride. Oh, here we go with the big names now. Bill Hader, Sean Penn.
Wow.
And
wow,
Peter Dinklage, of course, from Game of Thrones fame. A screenplay written by John Vitti, who I believe was a Simpsons writer and actually also wrote on the Larry Saunders Show. So, egg on our face for not having seen it. Clearly, it must be an incredible film. But I interrupted you.
I will resolve to watch this now.
We should do.
Actually, I've got an awful lot of time on my hands, as have we all. So, I mean,
no live
not?
sport. You could write a film review of it if you wanted, Paddy. It's not a bad idea.
Coming soon on The Athletic, Everton and Angry Birds, the film.
So, because Joe cut me off mid-question, I'm going to shame him live on the pod. So when I was in the office the day of the Game of Thrones last season finale, and all he did for about an hour and a half was hum the theme tune again and again and again and again. That's the kind of person he is, and the kind of person you're dealing with, Paddy. So we talk about the new stadium. Oh no! It's just I was asking
new
for that.
Stadium. You ask about the new stadium now. I'll just hum that in my
Joe,
head.
Don't make me mute you. Paddy, I want to ask, because obviously I think a lot of people would say the same thing. Like, Goodison Park is one of the best grounds in the country for a lot of reasons, and many of those are the things that you encounter before you actually get inside the stadium. I know a couple of guys who sell fanzines around there, and a couple of seasons ago they took me around and they showed me sort of the red brick wall where people remember fans who've passed away and lay flowers. And I just want to know what's the after the move to Bramley-Moore Dock happens, what's the plan with the land that Goodison's built on at the moment? Because obviously that's that's right in the middle of a community. And what are the plans there to kind of not replace it, but sort of well, I guess, yes, replace it. Yeah,
well, bringing this back to Denise Barrett Baxendale again. It was a couple of years ago at an Everton general meeting where Denise Barrett Baxendale was giving a speech, and she spoke about leaving Goodison and how she was having kind of sleepless nights thinking about how Everton did this. And the reason I think she was having sleepless nights was because Goodison is in Walton, and Walton is a poor part of Liverpool, but by proxy, given how poor Liverpool is in relation to some parts of the rest of the country, that makes it poor across the country. It makes it poor, period, if you will. So leaving Goodison and knowing the impact that would likely have on the chippies, the pubs, the bars, everything on County Road, which is kind of just a stone's throw away from Goodison, I think pose some difficult questions to people who have had that long attachment and connection to the club. And I would include myself in that. You kind of wonder the impact that will have on communities that are already poor and that do to an extent rely on Everton Football Club for match day trade and kind of resources. So Denise Barrett Baxendale, as she tells it, she was having those sleepless nights and then realised that, well, what do? We don't really leave, and this leads us on to Everton's what they're calling the legacy project. They will move to Bramley-Moore Dock in time for 2023-24, all being well, if they stick on timetable. I think it's September-ish that season. But they have also committed to the legacy project at Goodison Park. So what they will do is they will keep the land. They will gift it to a number of partners who they hope to get on board. They've signed a couple up already, NHS and a few others. And they plan to have a range of different things on the site of Goodison. So there will be affordable housing schemes. They will also have landscape gardens. There will be a community centre. There will be shopping facilities, health centre, mental health hub, which is something that they've been doing for a while to one extent or another. Mental health work as part of Everton in the community. Effectively,
is a mental health hub exactly what it sounds, Paddy? Just
it is, yeah. It very much does what it says on the tin, and in that sense, Everton will give the land to potential partners. The potential partners will develop the land, and then profits will be split 50-50, with 100%, we're told, of Everton's profit going back into Everton and the community. So it's effectively Everton's way of bestowing something back to the community. It's a pretty
great idea.
It is. It's a fantastic idea, and one that if you spoke to 100 Evertonians would tell you this is the right thing to do. So the club has always had, as I would put it, a strong moral compass. You can accuse Everton of being a lot of things, and at times they've been really poor on the pitch. But I don't think you could ever accuse Everton of not caring for their local community, and this is just another example of that. But I mean, all of us are touched by these schemes. And I remember my dad and my granddad are both Everton fans, but my granddad was going to some of those initiatives a number of years ago, and at one point he really wasn't particularly well, and wasn't able to interact as much as we knew he could. But one day he was given the chance to go around Goodison and share memories with other Everton supporters, and he just came alive. Just being inside the stadium, it kind of rekindled something in him that we thought had gone. And I think Everton does do that better than most. And maybe there's an element of bias there. I'm an Everton fan. I'm an Everton journalist. But I do think that there is that kind of strong moral compass there, and that makes it easier for me to stomach leaving Goodison Park, because I know Everton have to move in order to progress, in order to keep growing as an entity. But I also know that Everton need to do the right thing by the people of Walton, close to Goodison Park, and it very much seems like they're doing that here.
It's actually really nice to hear, because a couple of years ago I was in Coventry, and I wandered up to where Highfield Road used to be. And I mean, it's not identical, but the area is not dissimilar to what surrounds Goodison. There's quite a lot of terrace housing, quite a lot of red brick. And where the stadium used to be, it's just become this weirdly incongruous, like a kind of a white stone housing, not estate, but just a project. With these big, tall terrace housings, which loom over what was there originally. It's like someone has quite literally gouged something out of the community and just drop something else in, regardless of whether it fits or not. And it's just also for people who don't live in Britain and who aren't used to stadiums in communities, and obviously America's quite like that. You have a lot of out of town stadiums. One of the problems is that when stadiums and teams leave, a lot of businesses who were previously nourished by the team and by the footfall the team drew suffer as a result. And when I was in Coventry, I spoke to a woman who owned a local newsagent, and she said that there's a local park near there, and all the funding that used to do things like pick up litter and clean graffiti and send people in to make sure that there wasn't crime going on and it was a safe place for kids to play, all of that funding has dried up because people don't see that part of Coventry anymore. And it never even occurred to me. So it's really nice to hear that it's not, Everton aren't just approaching this with the usual rhetoric. It's actually a considered community-based response to it. It's really heartening, actually, Paddy.
Yeah, I think that's something that unites all Evertonians, really. And like I say, leaving Goodison is going to be a drag for all of us. Although, if you look at the surveys that have been conducted by the club, there's overwhelming support for the move. People understand it and get it. I mean, talking from a pretty selfish standing point as a journalist, anybody that's ever been to Goodison Park, you'll know this yourself, Seb. Anyone that's ever been to Goodison Park knows how kind of cramped for want of a better phrase, the media facilities are, how much they lag behind even places like Brighton at the Amex. And I'm not saying I want a replica of the Amex, because that's in a particular area, and it's out of town a little bit. It's well connected, but I think Everton need to be closer to the heart of the local community. But there are things wrong with Goodison that can't be overcome, even really by demolishing stands and stuff like that, which isn't really feasible anyway. And so the decision has rightly been taken. It's time for a move. We're going to leave some very, very happy memories behind, but if Everton want to progress, they need to go elsewhere. Do that, but also keep an eye on your local community, and hopefully then it doesn't become, you don't end up with a scenario where you leave and you go to this kind of soulless bowl on the outskirts of a city, like say the Macron or something like that. What is it now? The University of Bolton Stadium.
Yeah, University of Bolton. Yeah,
it changes all the time. Used to be the Reebok.
It is in a very strange place, though. I mean, you wouldn't know where you were if you were standing outside of it without the club's crest and everything on it.
Yeah, and given that Everton there's a really unique identity about Everton as a club. There are traditions that supporters want to see observed, and if they turn up at an out of town retail park and there's a stadium just being plonked there, as originally was suggested with the failed move to Kirkby, a part of a place just outside of Liverpool. I think there would have been uproar, really, in that case. So I believe and I hope that Everton are marrying the two. Everton are going to a community that needs development, as Bramley-Moore does. That's another really poor ward in the city of Liverpool. But then they're also making sure that the other community is not left behind. That seems to be, well, significantly better than the examples we've cited there in the case of Coventry and also Bolton.
Okay, Alex. It's Alex Stewart's 10-minute tactics point now. What have you been learning about Everton?
So Everton are quite an interesting side. They are good to very good at a lot of things. Their ball progression is decent. They have some really strong players in wide positions. If you look at the metrics, they're particularly good at getting the ball forwards into the attacking third. So they rank above their league position for things like touches in the penalty area, successful completions of passes into the attacking third. What they are lacking seems to be a kind of hard centre. So the central midfield positions are problematic for Everton. And there's a couple of things that throws up, which is quite interesting. So what they're not very good at is, and I say not very good, I mean they're bottom of the league for what we would define as short passing. So passes that are 5 metres or less. They have a 26% completion rate, which is the worst in the league by some margin. So Brighton and Wolves are the next worst. They're both on 31%. If you're looking at the best teams in the league, that's Chelsea on 45%. So you can see the difference there. What that means is that Everton are not very, very good at working the ball in tight spaces. Now, there are various possible reasons for this. And you know, unfortunately, it's quite difficult to go back and watch every single one of Everton's games and look for sort of compelling reasons that cross across all of these. But what it does suggest is that if Everton are pressured by teams, particularly in wide areas, they have difficulty working the ball through those tight spaces. And that is obviously a weakness. They're also the third worst for miscontrols. So when those passes are kind of fired into them, particularly in short areas, they're quite often losing the ball as a result of taking a heavy touch and then letting the opposition steal it or possibly knocking it out of play. Now, this is an issue that they have, particularly in the wide areas. There are two reasons for that. Firstly, they work the ball through the wide areas most. I think they're the third or fourth most skewed team for not attacking through the centre. So obviously there's a natural predisposition for them to do that, and it puts pressure on those players out there. Their most creative players are their wide players, particularly on the left-hand side with Richarlison, Luca Dean. However, what it also means is that the midfield is not crossing over into the wide spaces to help them out. And so what that means is those attacking players can get isolated. They can only have each other to work with, the fullback and the wide attacking midfielder. And it's much, much easier to get the ball off Everton. When you watch them, what's clear is that they are good at, working the ball laterally across the pitch. They've got some good passers. They've got good technical players like Alex Iwobi, for example, who's really competent at that. But this is a clear weakness that they have. And it stems, I think, from their overall weakness, which is the central midfield area.
Okay, well, can I ask you then, obviously Carlo Ancelotti is the Everton manager, and perhaps this is my sort of stereotypical expectations of an Italian football manager, or my sort of layman's version of what I imagined Ancelotti to be in the past. This doesn't strike me as an Ancelotti team. I would have thought that I associate him with sort of technical midfield players. Am I wrong to do so?
I think what's interesting about Ancelotti is that he's a very, very good manager, right? He's won an awful lot. But the way that he tends to do that is less about having a clear tactical identity that he cleaves to in the same way that, for example, a Jurgen Klopp would, or a Marcelo Bielsa would. Ancelotti is great at maximising the players that he's already got and finding a system that suits them. So across the course of his career, he's used different formations, he's used different approaches. Yes, he tends to favour possession to a degree. He's kind of in that what we call the press and possess school of football. And Everton are pretty good at pressing, and they're pretty good at working the ball into attacking areas. But it's very difficult to say with Ancelotti that there is a clear kind of tactical philosophy at work there. If you were to say Ancelotti had a philosophy, it would be, how can I adapt my system to get the best out of the players that I have? I think that's one of the reasons why Ancelotti is such a popular manager in dressing rooms, is that he doesn't come in and seek to impose a style that is blanket across all of the teams that he works with. He's really, really good at assessing who he's got and how he can make the best of them. I think that's why, for example, you see players like Dominic Calvert-Lewin who've really improved under Ancelotti. They've started doing things differently. The focus is more on running onto through balls. It's more on working with the wide players, and it's less about being a kind of target man. And we've seen Dominic Calvert-Lewin really improving his game because of that. And that's because Ancelotti comes in and goes, right, what are people's strengths? What do they want to be doing? And how can I create a system that most supports that? Of course, what that doesn't do is ameliorate the issues that you have in central midfield, where, generally speaking, I think it's fair to say that the players are not necessarily of the quality in terms of controlling that position on the pitch. There's obviously, when they bought Gbamin, part of that was to add this degree of midfield control, to find somebody who was more press resistant, and he's had incredible injury problems. It remains to be seen if he's going to be that player. I think the signs were good when he was at Mainz, but obviously it's really, really hard to know if someone's going to adapt and fill that role when they've barely played. Otherwise, that central midfield looks quite workmanlike, and they've Ancelotti has shifted between a 4-2-3-1 with a double pivot. He's used a 4-4-2, but where both wide players are kind of central midfielders-ish who tuck in a little bit. So, playing Gylfi Sigurdsson in a wide position, for example. He's obviously aware that this is an issue. He's obviously aware that most of his penetration is coming from his fullbacks overlapping, or from working with, players like Richarlison, and trying to feed the forward line. But if you don't have a midfield that can get across and assist, in the sort of the channel area, the half space, whatever you want to call it, who's able to create those little triangles that mean teams win possession, by default, you kind of end up playing quite a direct style of football and quite a wide style of football, because you don't have confidence in the midfield players to be able to sustain a more passing game. And Everton's best kind of use of the midfield in a offensive way rather than a defensive way is to pull the opposition team to one side and then quickly circulate the ball kind of vertically across. which they're capable of doing. You know, the players, if they have enough space and time, they are able to do that to switch the play. But they're not going to be able to get into the tight spaces and work those little moves in the way that, say, a Chelsea or a Spurs are able to.
I mean, I guess the problem, well, one of the things I think for Everton is that they don't really have many central midfielders. Well, I mean, who do we have? We have Morgan Schneiderlin, Fabian Delph. I mean, we've mentioned Gbamin already, Andre Gomes, but would your suggestion be in this situation, and based on how you've seen Ancelotti try to play Everton so far, that bringing in a central midfielder would be something they should be looking to do? Or is this just a style choice based on the strengths of the squad?
It's really, really hard to answer that. I think in Tom Davies, I think they've got a player who does have that technical ability. Davies is really, really capable, particularly getting forwards. He seems to have the kind of passing range to be able to play both elements of that. I suspect that the compromise that Ancelotti's been making up to this point, where it's generally speaking, you see quite a lot of Delph and Schneiderlin playing together. For example, this was the system that was used against Arsenal in their most recent game. You put the more creative players outside of them. You play Richarlison alongside Calvert-Lewin, but able to drop off and work in the wide space as well. And what he's looking for is solidity in central midfield. He's looking for midfielders who will screen and press and try and win the ball back and give it to the guys who are then capable of doing something with it.
Like Liverpool?
Not dissimilar to Liverpool in that regard. Yes. I mean, I say that not to compare Everton to Liverpool, but just to make a comparison for myself, almost to recognise that you don't have to have a particularly flashy central midfield pairing to win the title, for example. No, that's absolutely right. And I think if you look at what Liverpool's midfield are good at doing, it is good at pressing, screening and passing the ball on to the people who are doing the bulk of the creative work, which are the fullbacks and the wide players, as they are with Everton. I think the two differences are that Liverpool use a 4-3-3, which means that their central midfield naturally, because there are three of them, do move across into the half spaces and help out with that build-up play if that's required. That's why when we did the Metzala video, you know, people were talking about some of those Liverpool midfielders like Wijnaldum or even Henderson as being capable of doing that. The other thing is that Liverpool, by buying Naby Keita and also bringing Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain back from injury and bringing him into the first team, clearly show that very kind of destructive, competent but not flashy central midfield isn't always the answer to those questions, that you do sometimes need to have a player who can push up into the half space, who can do a little bit more creatively, who can drift out into the wide areas and help with build-up play. So Liverpool are sometimes like that, but they don't always want to be like that. And because they have a greater diversity in their squad of player profiles, they are able to answer that requirement. Everton, it seems like they don't really have that. Sigurdsson isn't really a central midfielder. He's not really a wide player. He's kind of a more physically robust looking number 10, but there isn't particularly a space for that in the way that Everton are playing. And so you either lose some of the midfield solidity by playing Sigurdsson as part of a double pivot, or you stick him into a wide area and hope that he can tuck inside. But again, it's not quite the right balance of stuff. So if I were Everton, I would certainly, I'd be praying that Gbamin comes back and is able to do what he kind of promised he might do when he was at Mainz. And I would look to pair him with Davies, who I think does have that range of skills. But I'm also not entirely sure that doing that in a kind of 4-4-2 situation with these tucking in players in the wide areas is the best way to go about that either.
No, okay. Well, just before we go back to the main episode, Alex, can you talk me through some of your XG findings as well? Because they're interesting.
Yeah, so there's a couple of other things about Everton. So they are the fourth worst team for what we'd say is goals minus XG. So it's basically a measure of how many goals you've scored in relation to how many goals we'd expect you to have scored. And they are, like I say, they're the fourth worst, minus 6.5. Only Norwich, Watford and Sheffield United are worse. So they've scored 6.5 goals fewer than you would expect from the chances that they've been able to create. That's indicative of maybe an over-reliance on one striker, of maybe a lack of difference in the build-up, of asking Calvert-Lewin to do too many things at the same time and not giving him the support that he needs. Potentially as well, they're coming up against goalkeepers who are having a great game or whatever. There's a degree of variance there, but that's certainly something to look out for. And it's particularly telling when you look at most of the other stats. Everton are, like I said at the beginning, they're top half of the table. In some instances, they're top 6 or 7. This is a real marker of not being that. Their best players, incidentally, for scoring in relation to their XG are Richarlison, Bernard and Calvert-Lewin. The worst, Holgate, well, I mean, that's kind of understandable. He's a centre-back. But Sigurdsson shows up badly on that. Keane shows up badly on that, as does Theo Walcott. So they've got players who are wasting good opportunities. I think one other thing that's worth noting is that while they attempt a lot of tackles in the final third and they do press quite high, they are quite bad at tackling. So they have the lowest percentage in the Premier League overall of tackles won rather than tackles attempted. They're around 55%. The league average is 60%. It's not a massive difference, but it does show that they're trying to play this quite assertive pressing game, particularly high up the pitch. But there's, again, what you could think of as a technical deficiency around that. So I think, Everton, they're a good side. They can certainly improve, but there are technical areas, both in defence and in passing, that they need to work on. And I think that a central midfielder is probably the best way to do both of those. Obviously, as well as Gbamin, they've got Andre Gomes coming back from injury. And I think Gomes is possibly the answer to that as well. He's a good dribbler of the ball. He's quite progressive as a passer. I'm not entirely convinced that he's the overall answer, and I think that there are flaws to his game. Again, what you'd probably want to do is create a 3-man midfield with Gomes as one of the outer ones, Gbamin as the kind of central anchor, and then either someone like Davis or maybe Schneiderlin as the sort of box-to-box player. So I think Everton's options will be augmented when those players come back. But again, it's always really, really difficult to assume that a player is going to come back from injury the same player that they were before. And it's not a great position to rely on where, you're looking at trying to solve your midfield issues with two players who've barely turned up that season because of injury.
Okay, Paddy, let me ask you about Jean-Philippe Gbamin then, because Alex has just talked about him from a tactics perspective there. Can you tell me more about his return to fitness? Because he's arguably been a miss this season, hasn't he?
Well, he's been a huge miss, and I say that with having only seen 135 minutes of football that he's played. He came on at, I think it was half-time against Crystal Palace on the opening day of the season. Did okay, but struggled at times with the pace and the tempo, understandably, coming from the Bundesliga. And then he played 90 minutes against Watford in a 1-0 win over Watford. So we have a very small sample size, certainly at Everton. And there have been a number of problems. First of all, he picked up a quadriceps injury. Everton thought initially that he didn't need surgery and gave him a return to play time of, I think, 2 to 3 months. We got 2 or 3 months down the line, and in October it was announced that he would need surgery after all. And then there have been 2 relapses since then, and another bout of surgery. So we sit here recording in May, and Gbamin is still on the recovery trail. He's still not yet ready to resume what would have been full training had Everton been at Finch Farm over the last few weeks. Admittedly, he is stepping it up now. We're told he's working 6 days a week, doing multiple sessions a day, One is more of a cardio session where he'll do runs and treadmill work, high intensity work.
Presumably, if he's been injured
stuff.
for such a long time, it will have an impact on his fitness more so than just being out for a couple of months, right?
Yeah, well, there's that. And I think the other kind of hidden element that people don't realise is that he will come back not really knowing his new teammates as he should after 9-10 months at the football club. Normally, by that time, you're firmly bedded in. Even if you've had some teething problems adapting to a new way of football, you should be starting to show signs. And Everton fans laugh at cliches over he's going to be like a new signing. We've had that through famine times where Everton haven't had much money, and then we've seen PR spin on players that come back from injury. But I think in this case he actually will be, if I'm going to use the cliche myself, he will be like a new signing in a multitude of ways. First of all, you have the need for a central midfield presence, a kind of an enforcer type in the midfield, or certainly somebody that's defensive minded. And second, he's going to need to have that adaptation period as well, where he learns how to dovetail with his future partner, learns how to kind of get back to match fitness, all that kind of stuff. I don't think he's far away from resuming full training, and a lot of the indications we're getting are positive. But anybody that thinks that football resumes and Jean-Philippe Gbamin will be there and kind of running the show for Everton from central midfield, I think will be sorely disappointed. It's just not going to transpire like that. I think there has to be an element of realism. We probably won't see his best football before next season at the very, very earliest.
Yeah. I mean, another way of looking at this as well is that, you know, any team would have been lucky to have Idrissa Gueye. It's a fantastic player. Is the idea, you know, for me as a non-Everton supporter, was the idea with Gbamin that he would come in and sort of replace some of the dynamism that you lost with Gueye, or is that not quite? Is that too narrow a way of looking at him as a player?
I think some of the dynamism is probably the correct way of answering that. I don't think Everton believed that they were going to be able to find another Idrissa Gueye. They did look, and they've got an analytics and recruitment team that works under Greta Steinson, the former Bolton player who's the chief scout at the club, and they did cast their net quite wide and look for players who were racking up the same amounts of defensive actions, interceptions, tackles, ball recoveries, all that kind of stuff as Idrissa Gueye. But Idrissa Gueye is a player that was interesting, not only PSG, but other top clubs in this country and elsewhere. He was pretty unique in what he did. He was competing with Wilfred and Didi at the top of just about every defensive metric for midfielders over a number of years. And it was decided that maybe Everton could find somebody that would do most of Idrissa Gueye's work off the ball, but that those players had serious rough edges to their game, particularly in possession. That meant that they weren't going to be suitable for a side that was kind of 8th, 9th in the table over the last few years and is positioning itself as a top 6 or a top 4 side of the future. So I think that's how they came on to Gbamin, because he does some of Idrissa Gueye's work, particularly if you look at kind of ball recoveries. He's strong in that aspect. He's mobile, aggressive, different physical presence, whereas Gueye's kind of small and got around the pitch. Gbamin's a physical specimen. I think he's 6'2" and has done well physically in the Bundesliga. But the thing that impressed Everton and also other people I spoke to that watched Gbamin was just that he was able to pick the ball up and transition through the lines very quickly, with and without the ball. He carries the ball well. He looks to play forward passes. Idrissa Gueye was underrated in that aspect, in my opinion, but Gbamin probably has more upside at 24 than Idrissa Gueye did in attacking elements. And really the plan was to find a holistic solution to replacing Idrissa Gueye, whereby Everton at some point under Marco Silva morphed from 4-2-3-1 to 4-3-3. And what that would mean is that instead of having 2 pivots in front of the back 4, they would have 3 guys, 2 of whom would be comfortable at least doing the defensive work. You might have Gbamin with Fabian Delph, who they acquired over the summer, and also Andre Gomes as well. So between them, kind of Gbamin and Delph would do a lot of the the donkey work that Idrissa Gueye had mustered. The problem with that has been that Gbamin got injured, Gueye was sold, and Everton then had serious problems in that kind of screening role.
I mean, you've had Delph and Schneiderlin, right, as a kind of partnership for a while. Is that fair?
Yes, but if you ask me what Ancelotti and Silva thought was Everton's best kind of central defensive partnership, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you. At the back end of last season, Silva's Everton did very, very well. If you look at results, they beat a lot of the top sides at Goodison, and were racking up kind of quite a decent amount of points. That effectively they were performing as a top 5-ish side towards the back end of last season, and that was based on a partnership of Gueye and Gomes in front of the back four, and Schneiderlin just in front. Then you had Bernard on the left, who is a busy, energetic player, wins the ball back quite a lot, presses pretty well, and Theo Walcott on the other side, or Richarlison. So it's kind of an energetic midfield that could do a little bit of everything. But losing Gueye and then his replacement, Gbamin, I think has just highlighted some inadequacies in other players and inadequacies in the squad. And they've almost been compounded in some ways by Ancelotti's move to 4-4-2, which of course means that you've got at times a numerical disadvantage in that part of the pitch. Teams often play with 2 to 3 central midfielders. Everton only have 2, and one of them tends to be Andre Gomes when he's fit, and he's not the best defensively. So the irony is Everton sold Gueye looking to go in a different direction, looking to find a midfield that was more balanced and did a little bit of everything. Ancelotti's reversion to 4-4-2 arguably means that Everton now need the Idrissa Gueye more than ever. So the irony there is not lost on me. But they're getting Gbamin back, you would think, relatively soon. And also Ancelotti, as an absolute priority, is identified, as you said earlier, the need for an addition in central midfield that provides what he considers to be more energy to the equation.
Paddy, can we talk about Dominic Calvert-Lewin? Back in, was it February or March, you wrote about his background, his journey to the Everton first team. If anyone hasn't read that, go and take a look. It's really, really interesting. And one of the themes that jumps out was something that I recognised in myself, is that at every point of his career, people have kind of assumed that he wasn't going to be good enough. Well, it's not everyone, but there was somebody who thought, right, you're not ready for the first team, you can't play at this level, you're not a good enough goal scorer. There's even a bit later on in your piece, which is pretty unusual to read, where someone says he's too selfless. He's too willing to do hard yards up front and run into channels and that kind of thing. And I thought exactly the same. I think about 6 months ago, I remember having a conversation on Twitter with an Everton fan and said, I can just never see him scoring more than about 5 or 6 goals a season. But he's fascinating because he reminds me a little bit of Thomas Müller. I mean, not in role, but in the sense that he scores a lot of goals and he scores a lot of scrappy goals. He's an effective player, but he's not a stylish one. How long ago did Everton fans start waking up to the idea that this is a really good player? And in your piece, you mentioned it, and I completely agree. This is probably someone that would be in the England squad were it not for coronavirus.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that he would have been in that England squad because of his form, but also then the injuries to a few players that also normally would be in the picture. And in answer to your question, I think there was only a majority behind Dominic Calvert-Lewin as a top-level Premier League striker probably December onwards this season. At Everton, I was still having people turning around to me, friends that I won't name now, but friends telling me that he was a kind of open quotation marks, close quotation marks, championship striker. And what they meant by that was whatever he did off the ball, the main role for a centre-forward is scoring goals. And I have to be honest, maybe this is with the benefit of hindsight, but I'd never believed that about Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I always knew that he needed to score more goals, and there was always that question mark as to whether he would be able to make that step. But I just fundamentally believe that the role of a centre-forward has changed over the years, and what he did so well last season, even when he wasn't scoring that many goals. We talk about that run where they beat Manchester United 4-0, they beat Chelsea, they drew with Liverpool, beat Arsenal. Calvert-Lewin, if you watch those games back, Calvert-Lewin bullied the defences, and he also created a lot of the space for Richarlison and Sigurdsson to then thrive. And I think that we've moved away from the Pippo Inzaghi kind of penalty box poacher striker, and we now look for far more from our centre forwards. You see that with Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp with when it comes to Roberto Firmino, and a lot of the best complete all-round striking performances I've seen from Everton strikers over the last 5-6 years have come from Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I remember a game at the Etihad. It was in Koeman's first season, I think. Second season, where Wayne Rooney had just been acquired, and Rooney scored early on at the Etihad. But the absolute standout player that day, from an Everton perspective, and it was a poor Everton side, the absolute standout player was Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He had 3 centre-backs up against him. One was John Stones, another one was Vincent Kompany, and then Nicholas Otamendi, who we can debate the merits of until the cows come home. But it was 3 kind of pretty well-respected Premier League defenders, and Calvert-Lewin that day was just absolutely fantastic. But he was fantastic in a different kind of role to the one we're seeing now. Like I was saying, he was selfless. He would run the channels. He would come short and hold the ball. I think that dual facet to his play and that dual aspect to his play has what's always intrigued me about him, because he's quick enough to spin in behind and trouble defenders that way. But he's also strong enough and adept enough in the air to win knock-ons, play with a partner, link play pretty well. And when you've got that and you're any kind of Premier League defender, I think that then becomes a troubling proposition, because if you go tight, you worry that he's going to spin, and if you drop off, then you worry that he's going to win every flick on for players like Richarlison, who are obviously very dangerous. So that was the basis, and yes, people have doubted him a lot. He's known that, and even at Everton, people have doubted him. There were concerns among the fan base. Silva never really settled on a front man for any concerted period of time. This season, as I wrote in that Calvert-Lewin piece, I think Silva had used 4 different strike options for the lone striking role in 4-2-3-1 before December. Not only Calvert-Lewin, but Richarlison, Cenk Tosun, and Moise Kean as well. And didn't really stick with any of them for more than 3 or 4 games. By the time he'd left, he'd placed a little bit more faith in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but it's only what's come since December, so in 5-6 months, that has kind of changed people's minds. Those detractors, that's what's changed their mind. They've seen somebody that's refined his game in conjunction with Duncan Ferguson, in conjunction then separately and independently with Carlo Ancelotti. And he's gone from being, as one person described it to us a few months ago, the striker that did not score, to the striker that scores every type of scrappy goal under the sun. And that's what you're mentioning there, Seb. You look at his goals, and unlike Richarlison, who scores every type of goal, from individual efforts to back post headers to tap-ins to curlers from the edge of the box, most of Calvert-Lewin's goals come from attacking the space in the 6-yard box. One reason or another, he's not a fantastic dribbler. He's not going to score many from outside the box. And yes, he's fantastic in the air, but that most of those goals come from inside the 6-yard box. So it's been a process for player and club, but this has been a real maturation to the point where if you were to do a poll as to Everton's most improved player, it would be Calvert-Lewin followed by Mason Holgate. If you did another poll across the Premier League, Calvert-Lewin should still feature. Such has been the extent of his improvement, and I think he has to take a lot of credit for that, but also Duncan Ferguson and Carlo Ancelotti have done an awful lot for him too.
No, I agree completely. Actually, it's funny because, as a fan, when you first see a player, whether you want to or not, you just have an opinion of him. You either like him or you don't. You think he's going to be worth something or he's not. And Calvert-Lewin is one of the first in ages to actually win me round, where you turn around one day. It's not because of any particular moment. It's just after a period of time when you've seen him, when you've seen him do enough good things or be effective in enough ways, you just think, you actually become intrigued by the player. And I think the goal that sums him up for me is, I think it was at St James's Park when it was his second goal of the game, when he attacked that space at the back post, like you're talking about, Paddy. and he scored, but he made this, it was ridiculously imperfect contact with the ball, and it kind of, he went into the net before the ball did, but it got there. And you just think, that's kind of it's almost like an old school commodity in a forward, isn't it? It's just put the ball in the net and worry about the style later. And it's almost like, I feel like I've been a bit of a snob with him, as if because he's not obviously good at sort of, he doesn't really seem to possess any kind of 9, 10 out of 10 attributes. And so you think, oh, well, he's not he's not stylish in the way that Richarlison is. He doesn't have the gifts of a Firmino. He isn't so sort of obviously effective like someone like Harry Kane. But it's a real testament to a player to evolve. And you mentioned this in the piece, and you talk about how Ancelotti's arrival coincided with the work that sort of added to the work done by Duncan Ferguson. What has been specifically behind the kind of the burst of goal scoring? Is this just confidence, or is this a product of the analysis that's been done behind the scenes and the kind of the tutelage of the player? I
think it's a combination of all of those things. I know from speaking to people close to the player that they credit Ferguson's first game as caretaker manager after Silva was sacked. They beat Chelsea 3-1 in December, and Ferguson not only changed the system, but he accommodated Calvert-Lewin as the focal point in that system. And they look back on the confidence boost that gave Dominic then as being the kind of the moment that changed everything for him, the catalyst for what we're seeing now. But I think in isolation, confidence maybe only gets you so far. And what he's known is that, certainly from discussions with Ancelotti and Ferguson, he just simply wasn't getting into enough goal-scoring positions. And there's been a lot of video work done by the player himself, but also with the coaches, on watching top strikers and looking at how goals are scored, and then effectively deciding, well, this is the position I need to get into 9, 10, 11 times in the box. And if that means I'm not chasing a lost cause into the corner flag, towards the corner flag, then so be it. Because if we play by percentages here, I'll be in the right place at the right time, at least on a number of occasions. So that's played a big role. The confidence and the faith shown in him by Duncan Ferguson. Ancelotti's added that sprinkle of stardust on top. And I think 4-4-2 as a system has been something that's maximised not only the ability of Calvert-Lewin, but Richarlison as well. They play better in tandem than they do on their own. A lot of the time we've looked at Richarlison and kind of questioned, what is he? Is he a left-sided player that likes to cut inside on his right foot? Is he somebody that plays from the right and goes on the outside? Does he play narrow, just behind a striker? Does he play as the lone striker? And he performs well in all of those roles. He's a perfect modern forward, a little bit like Roberto Firmino. But it was only when the two were lined up together that things really started to click. And I think the reason they're such a good partnership is because between them they do a little bit of everything, and they almost make up for each other's shortcomings. If you've got Calvert-Lewin there isolated in a 4-5-1, he starts kind of going wandering for the ball, maybe chases lost causes like I said earlier, and doesn't have the ability that Richarlison does to pick up the ball 30 yards from goal and beat two players and put it in the bottom corner. Flip that on its head, and Richarlison needs somebody to shoulder a bit of physical burden, to win some headers, put him into the position.
But he's the more needy of the two, isn't he?
He is, and I think I actually believe that he's Everton's best player. He's Everton's most important attacker, and has a skill set that could at some point appeal to elite clubs if it's not already. But facilitating him has also helped facilitate Calvert-Lewin. They facilitate each other, and they do that very, very well. One of Ancelotti's big points so far this season, upon assuming the role, was just that Everton were not playing the ball forward enough quickly. And by that I don't mean let's lump it long Sam Allardyce style, but instead we need to make sure that we're progressing through the thirds quickly, that Richarlison's main attribute is isolating defenders and beating them with his pace and power. Let's give him the opportunity to do that. And if we get the ball to wingers in advanced positions quickly and get some crosses into the box. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's one of the best headers of the ball in the league from an attacking perspective. So I think 4-4-2 it's created problems elsewhere, or exacerbated problems elsewhere, as we discussed earlier with central midfield. But arguably, it's made Everton's two main strikers, into quite a potent force to be reckoned with. And even looking back to some of the games in February, early March, the game against Arsenal at the Emirates that Everton lost 3-2, they caused Arsenal no end of difficulty on that day. Could have scored 4-5 quite easily. I think had a significantly higher XG than Arsenal if you're into those sorts of things, and just looked like a side that was finally set up to maximise the abilities of players that for a little bit too long have been neglected slightly by successive coaches.
Can I spare a thought for Gylfi Sigurdsson at this point as well? Because it's really interesting talking about Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin. I suppose facilitating each other in this well-working partnership. But how does that impact Sigurdsson? And presumably that's a good enough result to warrant moving Sigurdsson out of what I assume would be his preferred 10 role. I bring this up because I was thinking back to his time at Tottenham, Seb, and how after he left Swansea, he was never quite able to hold that position down because he ended up being moved around to facilitate other players. It feels a little bit like, outside of the national team and outside of Swansea, that's sort of the story of Sigurdsson's career. How is it working now with him at Everton, Paddy?
I think Sigurdsson stands to be the main loser from the move to 4-4-2, from 4-2-3-1, and by that I mean you've spoken of him there as what you consider to be an archetypal number 10. I think he himself considers that to be his best position in club football, even though he plays as a number 8 for Iceland. He likes getting on the ball. His main attributes really are striking dead balls and ghosting into the box late on, or striking from distance himself. And in playing him deeper, as Everton have had to, or playing him from the left, it means that he gets in fewer of those positions. You lose something in Gylfi Sigurdsson in doing that. And there were questions about Gylfi before the change of system. A lot of Everton fans were questioning whether Everton could afford a player as a number 10 who was touching the ball maybe 30 times on average a game. And you compare that to other players like Diogo Jota and some of the guys at Leicester, and they're far more active in general play. Sigurdsson it's almost become a cliche, but he's almost become a match of the day player insofar as people see a couple of things that he does, and they make up for all manner of sins elsewhere. The fact that maybe for 89 minutes of football he could be relatively anonymous, and that's not because he doesn't try. He's actually a very hard-working player and racks up an awful lot of yards on the pitch throughout a game. But I think for me at least, he's become Ancelotti's biggest dilemma moving forward. How do you accommodate Gylfi Sigurdsson, a player that, actually he started all of the games he's been fit for under Ancelotti. So successive managers have rated him and wanted to shoehorn him into the side. Marco Silva, I was told, compromised on his usual 4-3-3 because he felt Sigurdsson was worth it, and for a while Sigurdsson was worth it in that first season. But the move to 4-4-2 means that he either plays as a central midfielder, deeper, limiting his influence on the attack, or he plays from the left in an area where I think Everton are actually quite well stocked. They play in 4-4-2. The left-sided midfielder is effectively the surrogate number 10, and is allowed license to come inside and drift and create, with Luca Dean going on the outside. Bernard and Iwobi both seem ideally suited to that sort of role, and maybe Sigurdsson has some of those qualities too, but I don't think he's strong enough in carrying the ball to do what either of those do. And what's happened is I think he's been shoehorned into the side in this new system that doesn't overly suit him at present, and he's had teething problems and moving forward that remains an issue because he's now older than a lot of the other players in that Everton squad, certainly in the midfield. He's on a big contract, a lengthy contract, and a lot of people have asked me whether Everton should sell Gylfi Sigurdsson, but my question to that would be, who buys Gylfi Sigurdsson in the current climate? Where does he fit in? Because even teams like Sheffield United, first of all, they don't have the financial capability, you would think, to pay those kinds of wages, those transfer fees. But then even the sides that I've looked at traditionally as making bad decisions, teams like Newcastle, they couldn't come into an awful lot of money. Would West Ham buy him? Well, maybe.
Paddy, West Ham. He screams at West Ham.
Well, the problem has been, of course, that Everton have been lumped in with those clubs over the years. Everton have been, I think, a club that others have looked at, particularly when Mashiri first joined, as being a side that would take a Morgan Schneiderlin off Manchester United, would take Theo Walcott and Alex Iwobi off Arsenal.
Yeah.
And they continue to, well, they have continued to make those decisions. One of the really interesting things, looking back to the summer they signed Sigurdsson under Ronald Koeman, was that they actually bought 3 number 10s, or bought 3 players that wanted to play as a number 10.
Was Rooney one of those?
4-2-3-1, so they got Rooney as part of the Lukaku deal. They also signed Davy Klaassen, who's probably a number 8, but in a 4-2-3-1 would play as a 10. So this is an example of the muddle thinking. They effectively recruited 3 players looking to play the same role, which had a severe impact on the balance of the side. And Sigurdsson is obviously the last vestige of that. But at the time, Everton had decided they had a choice. They liked James Maddison at Norwich, and they liked Gylfi Sigurdsson. But the decision was taken. Sigurdsson is the one that is going to guarantee a certain amount of goals and assists right now, and we're going to pay over the odds, but we're going to get somebody that pushes the team forward, because we're not getting enough goals from midfield. For a while he did that, and for a while he certainly paid his dues. The question mark, I think, remains now. What happens in 4-4-2? What happens when he gets older? Who pays the fee? Who pays the wages? So I described him as the elephant in the room tactically for Carlo Ancelotti over the next 12 months. And if he's not sold, I would, and there's no indication he will be, by the way, but if he's not sold, I would stand by that. He's the one that I don't really see a place for in the current setup.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, listen, Paddy, I hope you'll come back in, 6 months' time, and we can review the Sigurdsson situation then.
Absolutely.
Listen, thanks so much for your time, and Seb, thanks to you also. We will be back next week with something else. Don't know what it is, but we'll do it. Thanks. Au revoir.